The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing Memento Mori, the latest episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going, Dom?
And Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, be sure to stick around to the end of the episode. We have some awesome feedback from listeners on our most recent episodes, and you're going to enjoy that. Be sure to share the podcast with your friends to help us grow our community of listeners and to reach more folks. The only way we grow is by the recommendation of you, our listeners. I want to tell you about another show on the network you're sure to enjoy called American Catholic History. You can find that wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/history. All right, so we have Memento Mori, another Latin title for a Star Trek episode.
Remember death.
Remember death.
Reminder of death.
That's right. So, Jimmy, could you give us a recap of what happens in this episode?
This week, our Let's Meet the Crew of the Enterprise episode again focuses on La'an and specifically her history with the Gorn. It's Memorial Day weekend in Starfleet, so everyone is remembering the people who have given their lives for the cause of space exploration. The Enterprise is delivering stuff to a colony, but when they get there, they find most of the colonists have been massacred, and it's all a Gorn trap. So the Gorn can catch the Enterprise and take its crew to one of their nightmarish breeding planets. The Gorn ambush the Enterprise and damage many of its systems, and so they go into the atmosphere of a brown dwarf where they play hide and seek with the Gorn ships. The ship and its crew have been critically damaged, leading to multiple subplots. One is in engineering, where Uhura and an injured Hemmer must repair damaged machines. Another is in sickbay, where Mbenga and Chapel must repair a damaged number 1. And Spock and La'an go on a shuttlecraft side plot where he does a mind meld on her to help her remember things from her childhood encounter with the Gorn. As the Enterprise goes deeper into the brown dwarf, pressure starts crushing the lower decks because the people who work on the lower decks are the unluckiest of all. and Captain Pike and his hair must order the bulkheads closed, resulting in the death of a crewman. Ultimately, since the brown dwarf is being sucked into a black hole, they jettison the contents of the cargo bay to make it look like they've been destroyed by the black hole. The Gorn ship then leaves, and our heroes have survived, except for 7 crew members who died and will be remembered on future Starfleet Memorial Day weekends. The end.
I gotta guess that they planned to have this episode air on Memorial Day weekend because that's about when it came out.
So.
Yeah. So it's an interesting that they've created this holiday of Remembrance Day, and part of it is that if you have fellow members of Starfleet that you served with. And you wear the pin of the ship on which you served when you served together. That if they're lost,
Well, I thought it was. I mean, maybe that was it. What I took was everyone as part of their observance. Everyone is wearing the pins of ships they formerly served on. Mm-hmm. And it looks like everyone on the Enterprise has served on exactly one previous ship because everybody's wearing a button except La'an. Everyone's wearing a button and everyone is wearing exactly one button.
I guess I thought it was like you pick one ship to honor this year where you served with someone else who's died.
Yeah,
so that's kind of how I took it as well. It was, and of course, with La'an's case, it wasn't a ship she served on. It was the colony ship that she was on as a kid is what she picked.
Yeah. And so she's having these flashbacks related to, it turns out her brother.
Yeah.
Who we'll get to, what happened to him, but she's having these visual hallucinations of some sort of him. This traumatic memories of what happened. And so she doesn't want to deal with Remembrance Day.
Meanwhile, our plot this week is essentially a fusion of the classic submarine movie Run Silent, Run Deep.
Yes.
The original series episode Arena and the Next Generation episode Disaster, where the ship is suffered a major disaster and everyone's having to deal with it.
You know, they really lean into the submarine comparison. Like at one point, Ortega's like makes a remark about dive. You know, I mean, I gotta say, and Father Chip Hines, who's a part of the network, it said this to me in a message. Like Ortega's has really become kind of growing on me, and I agree because she gets some really good lines at different points. I like Ortega's.
She's kind of the snarky comic character.
She's a better Janet Reno than the Janet Reno of Discovery.
Yeah. More likable too.
Yes, that's exactly. That's really what it is. It's more likable.
and she's got the most amazing anti-sideburns.
she's got a high and tight haircut. That's to die for. It's a really good one.
Yeah. So one thing that's interesting on a structural level about this episode is on a series structural level episode is that about the episode is that we're revisiting something. Because we've already had information about her and her past with the Gorn. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was focused on in episode 1. And now we're getting a deeper look at that, and we're returning to the Gorn. And this series was advertised as involving self-contained stories and not a big season arc. And so, yeah, this is a self-contained story, but we do have something of an episode-to-episode arc happening here. So that, to my mind, is good, because even if you don't have a season arc, which you don't need to do good storytelling, having to hit the reset button hard at the end of every episode so that nothing ever progresses is a flaw.
Right.
And that flaw was mandated for a long time in television by the idea that we want people to be able to watch episodes in any order. But that, which was driven by syndication and the fact that people didn't have home video. So if you missed something, you would be going, why is this person not behaving like the last time I saw them? But now that we have home video, you can watch episodes in any order you want once they're out. And so the idea that we need to hit the reset button hard and have no development from episode to episode, I think is a mistake writing wise. And I'm glad they're not falling into that and the desire to be episodic.
Well, it's nice. This is similar to New Doctor Who, where you would have standalone episodes, but they would put in something that connects an overarching season, and that and then have the occasional episode that like this that would be more directly towards the threat of the season. So I like that.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it'll be interesting to see, of course, at the end of this episode, the Enterprise is beat up badly. I mean, it's got holes in the hull, the whole works. How are they going to handle that next episode?
Is everything back to normal? Yeah.
Yeah. One thing, now they may make the Gorn into a recurring series threat, which would be fine with me. But my question is how far they can go with that, given the fact that they don't want, presumably they don't want to contradict things that are resolved in the original series episode Arena. And they do some good work here. Like they give La'an a line that lots of people have seen the Gorn. They just don't live long enough to talk about it.
Right.
And so that creates additional storytelling space involving the Gorn. But unless we're going to have our main characters dying, they're not going to be able to report too much about the Gorn without contradicting Arena.
Because Arena says that the Gorn have never been seen face to face, right?
Well, I don't remember if it says that. I haven't gone back to see exactly what it does say, but clearly Arena is like a first contact experience, and it's one that resolves peacefully. So any pre-contact experiences have to be minimal and maybe not involve seeing them, or at least being able to report about it.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see what they do. In this episode, we do not get to see the Gorn, which is a bit of a problem, or could be a problem if we start having multiple Gorn plots and we never see them. That's going to be unsatisfying at some point.
Yeah. According to Memory Alpha, the Gorn's official first contact with the Federation was Arena. So that was the official first contact, and all others were unofficial first contact.
Yeah. This episode is also longer than normal. This is 54 minutes instead of normally it's in the 40s. And it's a darker, grittier episode. And I thought I again thought it had interesting direction, meaning the director of the episode had interesting camera work and things like that.
Yeah. So just to kind of get into the episode itself, we have where the different characters are. Uhura is still a cadet, and she's on her rotation through engineering, and so that's why she's with Hemmer. And we get this attack on the colony. They're coming to deliver an air purifier to the colony, and when they get there, they find that it's been attacked. And there's a scene where they're looking around down on the surface, and the dog startles one of the security officers.
A Doberman Pinscher. We see a real live dog without a horn or anything on Star Trek.
Who's behind basically a standard door that you'd find in any convenience store in America, with a push bar and a key lock. Like, this is not advanced 24th century tech on this colony. I thought that was very funny. But they do find there are no survivors on the surface, evidence of lots and lots of violence.
And this is very much like the beginning of Arena, where Kirk and the gang show up on Cestus 3 planet, and the colony's been wiped out, and there are scorch marks all over everything. To distinguish it visually from that, this is set at night.
Right.
And but otherwise, it's very reminiscent of that.
In 1960s, they would not have large streaks of blood everywhere like we do now. But they do find the survivors in a cargo ship in orbit. And as soon as I saw that the cargo ship in orbit, I'm like, oh, sneak attack. They're bait. Like, this is clearly what they are. There's a little girl on board that La'an talks to.
I do like when they first find the ship of the survivors, and Pike doesn't know what it is. He gets on the intercom or he gets on the phone to number one down on the planet, and just really calmly and quietly says, "Number one, we have an unidentified ship up here. We're beaming you back up." Right. And that's it. No discussion.
Yeah, they're done. So La'an ends up talking to one of the survivors as a little girl and asks her memory of what happened. And the girl tells her about this. She didn't see anything, but she heard a sound, and the sound is this characteristic noise that the Gorn make, a clicking noise. And that sets La'an off in a PTSD, catatonic moment that almost gets her killed. And it's a very interesting choice they make here to not show, like, the Gorn ship is coming to attack. She's standing on this retractable bridge between the cargo ship that the survivors were on and the Enterprise, and she's frozen in place. And it's number one has to save her, but we cut from that to post explosion attack stuff.
This is something that happens a few times in this episode, where they tell us things and don't show them. And I don't know if it was for running time or budgetary reasons, but like later when they destroy one of the Gorns, so there's a Gorn mothership and then 3 Gorn fighters that they have to deal with. And they destroy one of the Gorn fighters, and they just tell us, oh yeah, that worked. Our photon torpedo destroyed it, but we didn't see it.
Yeah.
Right.
And it reminded me of a play written by, or an account of a play written by, what's his name? He was a Canadian economist and humorist. But the play is called Behind the Beyond.
Okay.
And it is a modern problem play written around 1900, and Stephen Leacock. And that's the author, and he's hilarious. His stuff is really funny, especially his book Nonsense Novels. But in Behind the Beyond, it's this modern problem play about a woman needing to realize herself, whatever that means. And we have these 2 acts, and when we come back into Act 2, the audience comes back and sits down in their seats, and we learn that one of the main characters from Act 1 has been killed. off screen and off stage in between acts, and the audience is profoundly uncertain about this new way of killing off characters without hand-to-hand combat acting, grappling with death scenes in front of us. What's this killing them off between the acts when we can't even see them? What's going on with that? And it reminded me of that when it's like, oh, yep, we just launched our photon torpedo. We saw the torpedo launch, and then suddenly, yes, it's been destroyed.
Right. We don't get to see the explosion.
I don't think they even gave us like a shake the screen type of thing from the the shockwave. Just kind of like it's gone.
Yeah.
So
by the way, the little girl who her name is Finn, and she's just in like one scene.
Yeah.
But her mom rushes up to her because Finn is freaking out and running down the hallway talking about monsters. And her mom gets up to her and says, "Honey, monsters aren't real." And I'm going, you are living in Star Trek.
Yes, monsters are real.
Do not lie to this child.
Right. Exactly.
Aliens are, but monsters aren't, apparently.
The girl just saw Gorn ripping people apart. Yeah, that's as real as monsters get. So La'an reveals it's all been a trap for the Enterprise. The colonists are bait. The Gorn hide under a hologram, wait until the Enterprise is vulnerable. Then they attack and run them down until the Enterprise's resources are exhausted. This is standard Gorn tactics.
Also, I'm entertaining myself by noting our string of technological failures to keep the plot going in this episode.
Oh, yes.
They show up at the planet. Oh, and the planet's communication satellite is destroyed. So comm failure.
Yep.
The radioactive, the ship of survivors turns out to have radioactive ore in it. Transporter failure. We've got to connect a transport tube to the ship. Therefore, we can't put up our shields. Shield failure. The attack damages the warp engines, warp failure, and then we've got to go into the gas giant that interferes with almost all of our systems, ship-wide system failure.
So haven't it been established already that they can extend shields around another ship? Like
for pre-TOS? I don't know.
Discovery?
I know that was done in TNG and DS9 and all those, but
yeah, but I'm trying to think of like if they did it in Discovery. Maybe they didn't. Maybe I don't know. But yeah.
Well, actually, wasn't there an episode where like Discovery and Enterprise were flying like right next to each other, and they had the shields around both ships?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm
think
thinking.
you're right on that, Dom. Because that obviously is season 2 of Discovery, but I thought there was something like that.
Yeah. Well, in any case, La'an is acting first officer because Una is injured. And of course, La'an is because she's compromised because of her trauma and her history with the Gorn.
Well, also, number 1 tells her, go to the bridge, they need you, because of her background with the Gorn. She knows more about him than anybody else on the ship.
That's true.
Yep.
So they need to hide from the Gorn. They're damaged. This is straight out of Wrath of Khan. Go hide in the Nebula when you're damaged, right? So now they're going to go hide in the atmosphere of a brown dwarf, which is orbiting a black hole, which is literally 200 kilometers away from the colony. Who builds a colony literally on the doorstep of a black hole? This is the sort of thing that drives me crazy about writers of sci-fi, TV sci-fi today. Have no idea of how far things are away from each other in space. Like they just have no sense of scale.
Well, and then of course the brown dwarf is literally an hour and a half from being ripped apart by this black hole.
What timing?
Well, the tidal forces of the black hole would already be affecting the brown dwarf by that point.
Exactly. It just where's Andre Bormanis? Isn't he out there being the science advisor for Star Trek still? Somebody, anyone? This is like J.J. Abrams level of messing with the science, and it just drives me a little bit nuts, as you can tell.
I know it freaked me. It freaked me out, not in a happy way. In his first movie, J.J. Abrams' first movie, where they turned Vulcan into a black hole, and its sister planet is remarkably unaffected by this sudden transformation of its co-orbital body.
Right. And then what he did in Force Awakens with just dude.
Well, Force Awakens, that's science fantasy, so
I guess we can see things happening in other solar systems. Anyway, the ship is crippled, and Hemmer and Uhura are stuck with an air filter.
So is Hemmer.
Yeah. And they're stuck with an air filter that's going nuclear, which here's another thing. Don't build air filters that can go nuclear. That seems like a flaw in designing an air filter. And so Hemmer's hand has been crushed. And
so obviously Uhura he's gonna have to instruct her, and she's gonna have to do the work, and it's like, see that coming a mile off.
Yes, it is a trope. We've seen this many times.
But you got to agree with Hemmer. I don't like teams.
Right. Hemmer being Hemmer still. You got to be Hemmer. Sick bay is also down, as you mentioned, and so they can't use the auto scalpel thingies.
They can't use the skin regenerators, so they're going to have to get out a needle and thread and use it on number one to seal up those wounds.
I feel like we've heard the term before, but I love it. They call it archaeological medicine.
Right. Because
I feel like we've heard that term before.
There's always someone on every Starfleet ship who's an expert in something from the 21st century or the 20th century. Like Riker's an expert in 20th century jazz, and all this. There's always somebody who's an expert in something from the past. Stone knives and bearskins. So
beads and rattles.
Yeah, right. That was the other one. So La'an. We get this scene where La'an rejects the Federation philosophy that understanding one another can lead to peace. And she says, some things in the universe are just plain evil. This is her assessment of the Gorn.
Yeah, and so this is another example of Strange New Worlds offering a critique or counterpoint to traditional Federation ideology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. She says the Gorn don't care about her emotions because she gets accused of being emotional. And she says the Gorn don't care about my emotions. She's always been blunt, doesn't care what the crew thinks of her, because as acting first officer, the captain wants her to rein in some of her bluntness and keep in mind that her part of her job is to help maintain the morale of the crew, to inspire them. She says, as acting XO, you have to project hope. So she's like, well, the Gorn don't care about hope. And he's like, but the crew does, and the crew will perform better when you are giving them hope. So that's that part of it. So Spock figures out in the Nebula, or I'm sorry, Rathacon, in the brown dwarf's atmosphere, which is basically like Jupiter. Jupiter's a brown dwarf, so it's a sort of gas giant planet.
Well, it's a bigger. So a brown dwarf is a.
I knew I wasn't going to get away with that.
Is bigger than a gas giant. It is the stage that is kind of between a gas giant and a star.
Okay.
And so it's not enough to sustain the kind of fusion that you get with a star, but it's bigger than an ordinary gas giant, and they're actually different. So it's pretty cool. Brown dwarfs aren't all brown. Some of them are purple, and cool. And so they're a neat thing that we didn't know about them during the TOS era, but we do now, and it's nice to see them incorporating them. In fact, also, even with suns, you can if I mean the outer part of a sun is sufficient, or can be, depending on the type of the star, is something that you could conceivably take a ship into and not have it destroyed by the heat. And because they're not all, some stars have very diffuse boundaries that are not super dense and not super hot.
Okay. There was an Enterprise episode we did recently where there was a Klingon ship that was inside. I think that was a gas giant where they had to rescue it.
Yeah.
So same sort of thing. And then, like, if they go too deep into the gas giant, the ship will get crushed and destroyed. And so this is, like you said, basically a submarine plot, a sub chase,
including having the Enterprise creak with the pressure as they go deeper, which is a nice touch because you creak when you are under a lot of pressure.
Right. I'm creaking now at my age. I'm under a lot of pressure. So the guidance systems, the phasers are down. They won't work in the gas giant. The guidance systems on the torpedoes won't work. But Spock figures out how to use a nav sensor to target the Gorn, so to see them. And
by tracking gas movements in the atmosphere of the brown dwarf.
And so the idea is...
The thing's got to have a tailpipe.
Right.
Yeah.
And the idea is if they, instead of shooting a torpedo at them, you let the gravity of the planet do all the work, and they'll just basically drop it out of the tube onto them, which is... I'm sorry, it's still going to be a pretty tricky targeting maneuver to do that.
Oh yeah.
And if you're close enough to just drop it on them, it's going to blow you up too.
Yes. So two things. As the Gorn ship was approaching, like the Gorn was coming straight at the Enterprise, there was a whole tense moment. Did you guys notice a vaguely Jaws-like theme? Dun, dun. Maybe it was just as I just watched Jaws for Secrets of Movies and TV shows, but there was a vaguely like that dun 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 sort of music. But also, I made a note at the same time. Yes, why did they not show us the torpedo hitting? Like it was just a weird. Yeah. It was a weird omission.
They showed us the torpedo, and it actually has a kind of cool design with fluorescent glowing strips on it as accents.
Yeah.
So they spent all the money to design a torpedo, which they didn't have to show us that, but
right.
But it's like I don't like actors being killed off stage between the acts. I want to see them. I want to see ships dying in fair hand-to-hand acting on screen.
There had to have been
yeah. Sorry, I was gonna say we get to see that later, but
yeah. There had to have been a creative decision for this, and I'm not sure what it was, but maybe the special effects like didn't work out, and they couldn't get it fixed in time for production or something. But
and as you said, Jimmy, this was a longer episode, so it's possible that there was even more that ended up getting left on the cutting room floor digitally.
Yeah, that's true.
At least we got to see Gorn ships, which in the original version of Arena we did not.
Right.
Although they added one in the remastered edition.
Yep. So we get a lot of this World War II submarine chase stuff, dive, and that sort of stuff, as I mentioned. We have the ship is going deeper. Pike's taking the ship deeper into the atmosphere. Stuff is collapsing. They have trying to evacuate. For some reason, Transporter Chief Kyle is on the lower deck of the ship. We're not in the transporter room. And he's racing. Poor Kyle, every episode, he's like the guy who's on the verge of every bad thing happening in every episode so far. It's kind of funny. So he tries to, he's running with this other guy. The other guy falls. He tries to help him up. And the guy pushes him to safety and then dies behind the closing bulkhead door.
And earlier in the episode, they'd set it up that the two of them were friends. They didn't, because they encountered each other in the hallway and were like nodding at each other, so they knew each other.
Yeah,
right.
And
now Kyle's trying to rescue his friend who's injured, and they're both going to die. And his friend pushes him forward through the bulkhead immediately before it closes, and then we see a shower of sparks. Knock the guy over as the bulkhead closes.
Right. And the implication being that he died.
And Pike knew that. Pike is giving orders knowing people are going to die. He gives the order to close the bulkheads from the bridge, knowing that's going to result in people who are not going to make it. And one of them happens to be a friend of Kyle's.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, he had said early on, introducing Starfleet Remembrance Day and all this sort of stuff. He had talked about, the sacrifices that are made for the sake of our exploration and that sort of stuff. And so they set up this idea of this affects Pike, this idea of, leading people to their death, but, ordering people to and giving orders that result in death. And that's a part of leadership.
By the way, so we commented on how, there is a transporter chief named Kyle in the original series, but he's not Asian. So they did a race swap.
Yep.
But there was, I was watching a video on YouTube that pointed this out. There was an Asian transporter guy in The Cage.
Right.
And so it looks like what they've done is merged the original transporter guy from The Cage, or one of them, because there's two.
Yeah.
But the Asian one with the later Kyle. So at least there's some continuity there. I would prefer, though, I have no problem. I have Asian transporter chief. That's great. I would just give him a different name.
Right.
Right. We also know that he served on the Shenzhou because he's wearing, that's his button, is the Shenzhou from Discovery, the Battle of the Binary Stars. So interesting that he was there as well. Meanwhile, back in sickbay, Una needs to undergo surgery. She's got she's been sewed up, but she needs to undergo surgery. But orders M'Benga to give the last of the plasma.
We should explain they've sewed up her exterior wounds, but there is still a piece of shrapnel near her abdominal aorta.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they need to go get.
Right. And because they are reduced to using ancient medical techniques, they have to do intravenous blood for, blood units instead of whatever magical futuristic device they use to replenish blood. And she orders M'Benga to give the last of the plasma to a different crewman just before she's going to undergo surgery. So that was kind of an odd thing because, so how does she survive? I guess M'Benga gets the intravenous thing working. I mean, the magic device working.
No, at the end of the episode, we get a brief shot back to sickbay revealing that M'Benga is hooked up to her and is giving her a transfusion of his own blood,
yes.
Okay.
Which she can apparently receive despite the fact she's now an Allerian.
Yeah. Well, it's plasma, so maybe they've got stuff to.
Well, they show the red blood though in the tube.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, it also
clear plasma.
The tube apparently goes through the uniform too instead of rolling up sleeves, which is a whole nother thing.
Well, so do the injections. I mean,
yeah, I know everything.
We don't think anything on them doing right on the shoulder, right through the
exactly.
jersey. So
again, magic. We can transport stuff right into people's bloodstreams, as we saw in the first episode.
One of the things I noticed visually as they're getting ready to do the surgery, we get a close-up of number one's hands as they come up towards her face or something, like she's putting a mask on of anesthesia. Mm-hmm. And she's got these glittery grid pattern fingernails. They're like golden, but it's like a golden pattern of some kind. And I thought, that's in continuity with something from The Cage.
Right.
Because in The Cage, number one, when she's holding a communicator up to her face, we can see she's got blue fingernails, which would be exotic in back in the 1960s for a woman to have blue fingernails. Today, it's like, I'm sure every woman has blue fingernails at some point. But,
right.
But they're trying to keep up this character quirk of number one having avant-garde fingernails.
Yep. That's true. So La'an comes up with, I think it was La'an. No, Spock comes up with an idea to, no, it's La'an comes with an idea to use the shuttlecraft to scout out the location of the Gorn mothership. And Spock,
and of course, the specific shuttlecraft, Galileo,
of course, again. And Spock insists on going along. And while they're on board, La'an says, I've heard of the Vulcan mind meld, and I want you to get the information that has been locked in my brain behind the trauma that will help us to defeat the Gorn. And he says mind melds are not a shortcut to dealing with mental trauma. And that's an interesting continuity from Discovery.
Yeah, she also says, that's a risk I have to take, which is one of my least favorite cliched lines ever. But at least here, it's about a mental thing rather than a mechanical thing. And so it's at least using the line in a context where it is less cliched.
Right. And what they're trying to figure out is the Gorn appear to communicate using patterns of light that they broadcast.
Signal lights, like modern signal lights are used to communicate between ships. Right.
Instead of communicators, which is interesting given the distances in space. Usually that would not seem to be a useful, but when you're in short distance, sure. And she has a memory of this, but it's scrambled in her mind behind the trauma, and that's what they're trying to get out. And so then they go in, and she has this memory of her childhood being chased, her and her brother, on the Gorn breeding planet. And it's interesting. They're children, but they're wearing a kind of uniform, which
looks like Discovery era uniforms.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they weren't in Starfleet. So maybe colonists who were like semi-militarized of some sort.
These could be like ship uniform or ship. What do you call them? The overalls, ship overalls.
Yeah.
Think of like if you've watched The Expanse, like they have a set of overalls that they wear on the ships. Something like that.
Okay.
These were civilians. This was a civilian ship that they were on. It was a civilian colony ship that was hijacked by the Gorn.
So we find out that her brother had been creating this decoding the decoder for the Gorn visual Morse code, basically, and he gives it to her and tells her they're apparently the last two left, and sacrifices his own life to save her so that she can be the last.
Yeah, and we get a look at the code that he's cracked, and it's basically pseudo Morse code.
Yeah.
And it's the same concept. It's just a different pattern. And I'm going, the Gorn aren't going to speak English.
Yeah. Right.
You're not going to be able to just take an English phrase and turn it into signal lamp Morse code and send it to them and have them understand it. It'll be gibberish.
Right. Yeah. And the universal translator magic device. Yeah.
That's the classic sci-fi trope, though, that the other languages have a 1-to-1 correlation with English, that, a letter in one language equals a letter in English. It's kind of a classic trope.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shorthand for getting everything in 50 minutes.
But then it's distracting.
It is.
I mean, it's because they're going for something realistic here. If you're gonna tell me you've magically cracked their light code, fine, but then don't show it to me as it's just Morse code with English letters and numbers.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Just tell me you've cracked their code, but don't go that extra step of showing me how you've done it and have it be ridiculously stupid.
Yeah, that's true. So back aboard the Enterprise, Uhura and Hemmer are getting to know each other while they're fixing the air filter and the nuclear air filter. And so she's trying to keep him awake and distracted because of the whole, injury thing that they do on TV. And so she asks him, how does an ANAR end up in Starfleet? I thought they were all pacifists. And Hemmer talks about being a pacifist in Starfleet. And I'm like, I thought Starfleet was not a military organization. It was primarily about exploration. So would that be incompatible with being a pacifist?
Well, given the number of fights you can be expected to get in, it's kind of a military organization. I mean, this whole we're an exploration organization. Well, that was nonsense they tried out during Next Gen, but that's just nonsense.
And he tries to sugarcoat or tries to cover it up by, well, I won't fight, but I will defend the ideals of the Federation.
Right.
Yeah.
By not fighting.
His line is pacifism is not passivity. And this is not inconsistent with actually how conscientious objectors have been handled here in the real world. The U.S. military has at various times made provision for conscientious objectors, but said, okay, you don't want to kill, but you could work as a medic. Mm-hmm. Or you could do some kind of other labor, and presumably Hemmer's like, well, I'm in engineering. I fix things. That's my job. I don't kill people.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Where it gets a little dicier is, but do you fix phaser and photon torpedo systems that do kill people?
Right. Yeah, he says pacifism is not passivity, but the active protection of all living things in the natural universe. So we'll see how I mean, there'll be a future episode in which he has to struggle with that. I mean, that could be an interesting moral struggle. So
he's basically an over glorified motor pool mechanic.
Yeah. So then the nuclear air filter is going critical, and they decide the only thing they can do is now vent the cargo bay into space,
just like LaForge and Crusher did in Disaster.
Yes. In this case, they're going to put themselves in pressure suits, and anchor themselves to completely insufficient anchor points.
Yeah. Any compartment that can be vented into space needs to have fixtures on the wall you can tie yourself to.
Right.
Also, they ridiculously juiced the drama for this by not telling us they had spacesuits until the last minute.
Right. And then the whole, the explosive decompression is not going to rip you the anchor point out of the wall or floor,
especially if you're standing next to the wall. Right. Because there's no air behind you to propel you out into space. If you're standing right up against the wall, all the air in front of you will leave. Yes. But there is no air behind you So news you can use if you are ever in an explosive decompression situation. Stand as far away from the point of exit as possible.
Right. Space may be a vacuum, but it doesn't suck. that's my safety sign for all of the engineering spaces on board Starfleet ships.
Something gravity, but yeah.
Right. So the solution to getting away from the Gorn and making them think that they're dead is they're going to skirt the event horizon of the black hole and drop the exploding air filter there. The redshift of the black hole will make it seem like the Enterprise stopped at that location and exploded. And then when instead they're really slingshotting around the black hole, hopefully not going back in time. And then the Gorn will go away without scanning for them, apparently. So that's what they do. I mean, there's a lot of drama in the midst of it, but that's what they end up doing. And everybody, Una wakes up. She's going to be fine. There are 7 crew members dead, though, and several civilians from the colony that also died on board the ship. And the Enterprise is in bad shape. So, like you said, Father Cory, it'll be interesting to see if we have that continuity. Next episode, is the Enterprise all ship shape, or are they go ahead into space dock to get all the damage repaired? That should be interesting to see. So, any final thoughts on this episode, Father Cory?
No, I enjoyed it well enough. It was a fun episode, but yeah, it definitely pulled on the tropes. That's for sure.
Sure. Jimmy?
A few notes. So as part of the interesting direction for this, I really liked the brightly lit but creepy, wobbly, blurry camera angles after the attack, where La'an is like dazed and Chapel's trying to treat her. And it's brightly lit. The camera's wobbly, things are blurry, and we're getting weird, we're getting Dutch angles, as they're called, but it's effectively creepy. So I liked that. I also noted Pike trusts his crew way more than Kirk did. Pike accepts other people's recommendations and frankly more than Picard did, without lengthy discussions. So he really is more trusting of them than others. We got a little bit of audio footage of Michael Burnham in the mind meld scene, where we hear her saying, after La'an has had her mental encounter with her brother Manu, Noonien Singh, she picks up on Spock's relationship with Michael, who also sacrificed herself to save him. Right. And we hear Michael saying, "I love you too, brother," from season 2 of Discovery. And then she says, "Starfleet records don't show a Michael." And I'm going, wait, what? I mean, the fact she survived the big special effect at the end of season 2 and went into the future, that may be classified. Right. But why would all memory of her existence be deleted from Starfleet records? That makes no sense.
She was the first Starfleet officer tried for treason. Or mutiny.
Yep. What, did they purge Google News of her? Have Winston Smith send all those news stories down the memory hole?
Yeah, and make everybody forget to do the Men in Black flash in their face. Yeah. That was a misstep.
Yeah. Let's see. The Pike has unreasonable faith that the Enterprise will hold together, but based on his private comments to La'an, he may just be projecting that and just hoping. One thing that's begun to be a little bit of a concern to me is I think they're overcompensating in terms of giving the female characters power and agency. Instead of having them just as normal, respected characters who can make contributions, there are these girl power moments. And they keep coming up. I mean, it happens a few times, I don't care. But there seems to be a pattern of them. Like in this episode, we have Spunky Uhura girl power in engineering, and Spunky Chapel girl power in sick bay, and La'an girl power, and all this. And I started noticing a couple episodes ago, Nurse Chapel is getting
Way
more
more.
airtime than Mbenga.
Yeah.
And she's displaying more agency than her boss. And she's getting the zinger lines, and she's shining consistently. She's outshining her boss.
Right.
And it's like, I like Chapel. I even like this version of Chapel. I like this version of Chapel better than the original.
Sure. Yeah.
But
I'm with you.
don't go so overcompensating about men-women issues that you make her shine at the expense of Mbenga, who needs to shine too.
Right.
And we see a similar pattern in engineering in this episode, where Uhura basically, even though she's not the expert on engineering, she basically schools Hemmer on what we need to do to get through this situation.
Yeah.
And
Right.
she has her girl power triumph moments, and the crowd goes wild. And it's like, look, I like these characters. Don't ruin them for me by having them be Mary Sue's.
Right. They're not
Right.
simply competent. They're being super competent and super over the top in how they do it.
Yeah.
Well, and I that's where last episode I kind of said is I'm not sure I'm a fan of number one being Superwoman.
Right.
And it's this kind of thing too. It's like before they even reveal that she was Allerian, I like the character. This is good character. This character we want to get to know. We don't need to make her that she's like
Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
Diana Prince. Ooh, Diana Prince. And remember, Chris Pine played Steve What's-His-Face in the movies, and Chris Pine was Captain Kirk, and we have Pike. Never mind. So
You can play 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon another time.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
right. One thing, speaking of Mbenga, I was kind of waiting for him to get upset that they were losing all of the systems in sickbay were going down, given that his daughter's life depends on the pattern buffer and the medical transporter working continuously. But they've dropped that.
Well, and they said they were going to do a technical fix to prevent it from happening again, and I assumed that meant they were going to isolate it. Oh, and they were going to, number one specifically said the power for that transporter is now going to be directly linked to the warp core.
Okay.
So
Right.
unless the warp core goes offline, that thing's going to have power.
Okay.
In other words, they ran another wire directly from the warp core to the transporter.
Okay. That's what they did. Okay. All right. So I think that should do it for our discussion of this episode, but I do want to go to our feedback, which we've got some great feedback from our first episode of Strange New Worlds, the title Strange New Worlds. We have an email from John who says, I also was having trouble understanding what was going on with the timeline when Pike was referring to the Second Civil War, the Eugenics War, and the Third World War. But here's a couple ideas that could reconcile it with previous info established by Star Trek in the canon. The first idea is from Memory Alpha, which is that Spock was simply wrong about the eugenics wars happening in the 90s. That's possible, but I think this is probably the laziest way to retcon something like this. The second is that Pike says the eugenics war, singular, implying it could be a different conflict with a confusing name. We see Sung with the con file in Picard, and it's possible that he got that from back then, and that a new conflict related to eugenics started after the events of Picard and the Second Civil War. My idea of the timeline is something like this: 1990s, eugenics, wars, plural, as previously established. 2024, events of Picard Season 2. 2024 to 2026, the Second American Civil War. Then shortly after the Civil War, it turned into a broader conflict that spilled over into other countries called the Eugenics War. And then 2026 started World War III after an escalation from the Eugenics War. What's also interesting is that, as far as I can tell, based on what else we know about World War III, is that it seems like the U.S. not only survived, but won. And this is despite us knowing the country was in a civil war. Maybe it was like France during the War of the First Coalition. Anyway, keep up the good work. Always enjoy listening every week. So one comment I would have on that is I don't think maybe I forgot, but I don't think the Second Civil War and all that is started immediately after the events of Picard season 2. I think it was implied the World War III and all that sort of stuff happened some time after that, before the events where Zefram Cochrane shows up.
Based on the timeline on Memory Alpha, it looks like the conflict started 2 years after Picard season 2.
Okay.
In 2026.
Okay.
So I don't know what they're doing. I guess maybe if they have a coherent explanation, more of it will emerge with time. But there are just inconsistencies, it seems. Among them, one that I haven't seen pointed out is the number of casualties. Because at one point in the original series, Spock gives a specific figure of the number of millions of people that are killed in World War III. I think it was like 37 million. It was something like that. It's not a huge number. I mean, millions is compared to a world population of 7 billion. It's actually a pretty small number. But then in Strange New Worlds, they've indicated that this conflict involved like the death of a third of humanity or something, which has got to be way more than 37 or 56 million or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't one of the things that the movie Star Trek First Contact talked about is that the first contact day happened right at the end of World War III, or really close to it? Because there was something where the Borg sphere was shooting at the site of there in Bozeman, and mentioned something about Russian satellites, attacking. And and maybe that's just something that was implied with that, where it was after World War III, we know that, but that it was close enough that there would still be operative offensive Russian satellites.
Oh, sure. We're still in a time when nation states exist, and so they haven't all merged yet. But I would assume those are just a defense grid the Russians had up. And
what I mean though is more in timeline wise, where if we take this timeline like the feedback says, World War III would have lasted about 40 years.
So according to Memory Alpha, First Contact establishes that World War III ends with a nuclear holocaust in 2053, resulting in the deaths of 600 million people. And that 20. So Spock might have been referring in the TOS to the eugenics wars, maybe, where 37 million.
I believe he says your third world war.
Oh, okay. And then it's 2063 when Zefram Cochrane launches the flight of the
10 years after. Okay.
So 10 years. So.
But you're still talking if this is 26 or something, 2026 is when World War III starts.
Yeah, you're
still talking a good 30 years worth of war.
Yeah,
25 years worth of war. I mean,
it's not unheard of, but yeah. Thor, thank you to John for your email. And then our next feedback comes from our episode on Ghosts of Alleria, which was last episode. Kelly writes on Facebook, "It wouldn't be Star Trek unless there's at least one episode where the entire crew goes nuts for some reason. I like this episode, but I find that I enjoyed the first 2 episodes more. On the whole, I have high hopes for the series after the first few episodes. I actually want to rewatch episodes. While there were elements of Picard that I enjoyed, I never wanted to rewatch episodes. Currently, the only new Trek that I want to rewatch is Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds. So far, I'm really liking the characters, but I do think that Pike's hair is getting out of control. If it gets any taller, he's not going to be able to fit under doors."
Indeed.
I wonder if there's a future episode where it's revealed that Pike's bouffant is actually home to alien mind control parasites. As for the reveal of Oona's genetic enhancements, it wasn't a surprise to me. I called it in the first 5 minutes of the episode. As soon as genetic engineering was mentioned, there was a moment when Oona gives a certain look. It was then that I knew she would be revealed to be enhanced. So, and then our last feedback, Paul on Facebook, "It's good to challenge Starfleet and the Federation on its heavy-handed policies. A more nuanced interpretation is better. However, I would like to see counterbalance episodes showing why planets choose to join the Federation or individuals choose to join and serve in Starfleet." So, very good. Yeah, I agree. I like to see the balance. Show
don't tell is always a good rule to go by, and rather than just telling us Federation morality, showing us examples of it, you know, and the reasons behind it is to be preferred.
Yes.
Yep.
As long as they're not boring, hackneyed scripts with the same, oh, now we just understand each other ending every week.
Right. All right. We'd like to take a moment now to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Trek, including Joshua N., Paula W., Silas H., Kelsey S., and Jim B. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So that's it from us. We'd love to hear what you think of this Strange New Worlds episode called Memento Mori. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, at our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. You can send an email to trek@sqpn.com or join the conversation going on at our Discord community at sqpn.com/Discord. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the next new episode of Strange New Worlds called Spock Amok. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thanks, but I had it down. We were going to be watching the Warner Brothers Daffy Duck cartoon Duck Amok.
Oh,
Right. That's what we should prepare for. And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, the best miracles are born from truth.